2 years ago today, I was standing together with 20,000 other people in the darkest place in the world, in Auschwitz, on Yom HaShoah. At that day, after the service in Auschwitz, where over 1.2 million people were murdered, gassed, and tortured. Hundreds of thousands of them were young children, babies. We went into one of the bunkers, and David Schachter, a Holocaust survivor who was on our bus, came in there. And he called us all into a circle, and he says, "My dear friends, I need you guys to be our mouthpiece." You see, I come to Poland not because this is a trip I enjoy. This is a very painful trip. I need to relive the horrors that I've been through. Yet, I come here to make sure the world doesn't forget how they died, and the world doesn't forget how they lived. We're not going to be around this soon. We need to make sure that the next generation bears witness to what happened here that day. And I told David, I will do that. And that's originally why I went on this mission. I was encouraged by a good friend of mine to go on this mission. He said, because there's not many opportunities to go together with Holocaust survivors. And when you walk through Auschwitz and Treblinka and Majdanek, with a survivor that's been through it, the story means very different. I remember standing with David Mermelstein on my first time to Poland. We were in Auschwitz. And he shared with us at the spot where him and his family came off the train, his grandparents, his sisters, his younger brother, his parents, and they came off the train. And we're standing at the spot. And they said, men and young adults to the right, women and children and grandparents to the left. At that point, they didn't know what that means. Someone came over to him and asked him, "How old are you?" He says, I think he said, "I'm 13. He says, "No, say you're 15 or 16. He says, "But I'm 13. He says, "No, say you're 15 or 16. He comes to the end of the line. And they asked him, "How old are you?" He didn't know what that meant. He said he's 15 years old or 16. I forgot the age he said. And they said, "You go that way." And he sees his grandparents and his sisters and his younger siblings, brothers, going to the left. He had no idea what that meant. And he points to us where that was. Then he goes with the group to the right. And they tell him, "Take off your clothes, shave your head." He ends up in the bunker, and he starts asking the capo, "So when am I going to go see my grandparents? When am I going to see my sisters, brothers?" They don't answer. Just imagine this, my friends. Listen to this story. Just imagine this. After an hour, he's standing in the bunkers, in that bunk, whatever that was. And he says, "When am I going to see my brothers and sisters?" He says, "You want to see your younger sister? You want to see your father? You want to see your grandfather? You can see him right now." And they take him to the door. They open the door. They point up to the chimney. They say, "You see up there?" And there was smoke coming out. That's where they are right now. Stop and think about that for a moment. That's where they were. This story happened millions of times over and over again. A little bit different. It could be a shot in the pit. It could be somewhere else. David Schachter, another Holocaust survivor. In Birkenau, we were standing in front of the building where he was a 12-year-old boy beaten there. 12-year-old boy. You have children. Well, think of us when we were 12 years old. No family. Just one brother at that point. His job was to go to the trains and clean out the trains when they came. Dead people sometimes were in the train. This is what he had to do every day. And David tells me, "Do you know, I never met a person that knew me when I was growing up." Till today, he thinks about that. Maybe one day I'll meet a person that knew me. This is just two short stories of people that told me, and we stood at the spot where they were. You know, thinking about 6 million is very, very challenging because we can't comprehend it. I'll be honest with you, going on this trip, I didn't find answers. I had more questions. Me and everyone else that goes on this trip. How could this be? How could people be so evil? Where was God? Where was America? Where was everyone? And your head is spinning. I remember the first time I came back, I couldn't really talk for a few weeks. I couldn't even process it. It was overwhelming. But on the other hand, there was another point that was something very, very inspiring, which I'd like to share also today. What was inspiring is, I remember when one of the stops they told us is we're going to go to this cemetery in Warsaw. I said, we'll go to a cemetery. Who wants to go to a cemetery, right? You ever want to go to a cemetery? And I remember when I pulled into the cemetery, they have a list of all the people that are buried there. I said, oh my God. Some of the greatest rabbis that I study their books are buried there, lived in Poland for the last 1,000 years. Some of the greatest poets, people that had the greatest impact in Judaism, are buried in that cemetery. Oh, wow. We focus so much how they died. We don't think much about how they lived in Poland or in Europe. The giants of our history all lived there. All had such great impact. So true, there was a 6-7 year period in our history where Hitler and his army and his helpers, the Poles and all the other ones that helped him, I'm not saying all the Poles, but some of them, and in other parts of Europe, helped them wipe out the Jews. And in Poland, they did a pretty good job, 90%. And I remember walking to Shul Shabbos morning in Warsaw, thinking to myself, you realize, here I'm walking alone, but 75 years ago, this place was packed. It was like a borough park. Or it was like for Florida and Aventura, where it's packed with Jews, and now it's all gone, wiped out. But this place was hustling and bustling of Jewish people. We need to make sure that Hitler Yamach doesn't win. We need to make sure that Judaism remains alive and thrives. We need to make sure that we tell the 6 million, you were murdered in cold blood, but you weren't forgotten. We're continuing to live a Jewish life and showing Hitler and all the other anti-Semites that want to wipe us out, it's not going to work. Whatever you try to do has no effect. You may have heard the previous generation, but we were going to rebuild, and we did rebuild. My dear friends, I want to ask you a question. If I asked you, pick a time in history, any time in history that you think was the most miraculous time in history, and you would love to witness that time. Some people would say, you know what, witness the Exodus of Egypt. Some people may say, the witness the story of Hanukkah or Purim. I'll tell you, we don't have to go back to another lifetime to witness the greatest miracle in history. All of us have lived through the greatest miracle in the history of mankind. You may ask me why. There's never been a darker part in our history than what happened in the 39 through 45. Even if you're not a Holocaust survivor, go on a trip and walk through Auschwitz and walk through Majdanek and walk through Treblinka and go into the concentration camp and go into the gas chambers and see the ovens. It shakes you up to the core. And think about all the lives that were destroyed. And then think about a group of people, the David Schachters, the David Mermelsteins, all the other survivors that you know could be your parents, left broken people skeletons. And they got up from the ashes, and they didn't walk around the rest of their life as victims. They said, Am Yisrael Chai, we're going to rebuild. They got married, started families, started businesses, build up our country to the beautiful Jewish institutions that are in Miami, in South Florida, in New York, in California, in Israel, in London, in Australia, in Russia, wherever there is. They're the ones that rebuild it. The darkest period of our history came right after that, the greatest light. Look around the world and look what they did. To me, that is the greatest miracle in the history of the world. And these are the people that need to be applauded. And these are the people that need to be respected. And these are the people, the giants and the heroes of our generation. A rabbi once said, if you want a blessing and you can't find a holy rabbi, find a Jew that has a number on the hand and go, if they don't have a number, they've been a Holocaust survivor, and go over to them and ask them to bless you. Their blessings go straight to heaven. Many of them, in the most difficult and darkest moment, still fought through, during this concentration camp, during the Holocaust, to remain connected to their Jewish heritage. So many stories. I could speak now an hour. I remember another Holocaust survivor, Barry, Mr. Labovitz in Brooklyn, New York. He was telling me that on Hanukkah he wanted to light the menorah. He didn't have a menorah. Hey, think about this. In the concentration camp, you want to light a menorah? Who cares about lighting a menorah? So he went into the woods and took a branch and broke it into 8 pieces, put it into the snow, and lit it. That's what you're worried about? Yes. That's what he wanted. That's what he wanted to witness. That's what he wanted to be. You see the resolve of them. And then when they walked out of the concentration camp, when they walked out of the death, they went and rebuilt it. These are our heroes. They accomplished so much, and we are the ones that have to be grateful to them. That is the greatest way to remember it. To be the mouthpiece of David's is to make sure that what was killed and wiped out in Poland and in Germany, all over, is being rebuilt, not only in one place, all over the world. You killed one person, we're going to build a family of 10 people. That's what we're going to make sure. Someone once came to the Lubavitcher Rebbe and said, could you get behind a campaign to that every home should have, by the Seder, an empty chair to remember a Holocaust survivor. So the Rebbe said, we shouldn't have an empty chair. We should have a chair, but bring another Jew that doesn't know about Judaism to that chair. That's what the greatest remembrance is. We need to remember what happened, how they died, so it never happens again. We need to make sure that anti-Semitism is nipped in the bud right away. But we also need to make sure that Am Yisrael Chai, the Jewish people, live is we continue to build our Jewish institutions, continue to do acts of kindness, continue building the world, continue making a difference in everything in the world. That is the greatest memory. That is the greatest way to remember. One of my favorite stories that I heard, that it was Hanukkah night, and one of the blessings that you say is Shechiyanu v'kimanu v'giyanu, thank you, God, that we made it to this day. And a rabbi, they got a menorah, they were to light a menorah, and he was making the blessings on the menorah. And you make Hashek Kedushan Zilad in Chanukah, Shelson Islam Vasein, then you came to the third blessing. When he came to the third blessing, he paused. And after a minute, he made the blessing. So someone asked him, why did he pause before the third blessing? So he said like this. He says, what does the blessing mean? The blessing means Shechiyanu v'kimanu v'giyanu lazmanazah. Thank you, God, that I made it to this day. He says, how can I thank God that I made it to this day? There's so many people that have died, so many people had so much trouble in their life, so much pain, so much suffering. How could you say this blessing? But then I looked around the bunker, and I said, in spite of the hell that we're living through, in spite of everyone in this room lost their whole family, what do they want to do Hanukkah night? They want to light the menorah. Thank you, God, that I made it to this day, that in the darkest place of the world, your children want to keep your tradition. Whoever believed that? Today we can say the same thing. 75 years after this greatest destruction, we as a Jewish people didn't go and say, forget about Judaism, forget about rebuilding our lives, forget about believing in mankind, the hell with it all. No. Our survivors said, we're going to rebuild Judaism, we're going to rebuild our life, we're going to rebuild humanity, we're going to change the world. We can say, Shechiyanu, Vikimanu, Vigiyanu, Lazman Hazeh. Thank you, God, that we're able to witness this great miracle. Now it's up to all of us to make sure that this miracle continues. If we make sure this miracle continues, we will make sure that these 6 million are not buried in Auschwitz, Treblinka, Majdanek, but these 6 million are with us all over the world, in all our homes, in all our institutions, in all the places that we inspire in the world. They're with us, with their soul, inspiring us to continue living the life the way we live. And may this be a miraculous day, a miraculous month, and a miraculous year.